Hey everybody, welcome back to TechOdyssey. So today I wanted to tackle the question of, does the next BlackBerry need to have flagship specs? This is something I've kind of been thinking about quite a bit here recently because of course I still have my Blackberry Key2 and it's actually paired with this new TicWatch 3 Pro right now that I'm testing out, which is pretty neat because I haven't had a smartwatch that I really wanted to pair with a BlackBerry in quite some time. Maybe I'll talk about that later. But yes, does the next one need to have flagship specs? And I think this is an important question because some people are like, no, if it has flagship specs, it's going to be too expensive and then people won't want to buy it. But if it's too cheap, then people who do buy it are going to be not happy with it. So I think that there needs to be a happy medium, and I think there needs to be flagship-esque specs. And just go with me for a minute on this. There are such good phones right now that you don't need to necessarily have flagship specs for it to be a really enjoyable experience. And that's really what we're going for here. We want to have a fantastic keyboard, and I think most people would agree that the Key2 has a pretty good keyboard on it. You know, other than the splotchy spacebar issues, but we're not going to talk about that. This is not a quality control video. If this keyboard worked as intended all the time for everybody and made everybody happy, I think that most people would say this is a pretty decent keyboard. However, the rest of the package, maybe not all that great. We could have had a better screen. I would have liked one. I mean, I thought it was kind of dim. I thought the colors were not that great. It really was kind of a disappointment. So we need a better screen. Yes, I think that most people can say that. I think that 1080p is still fine. I don't think it necessarily has to have a Quad HD Plus screen. There's a lot of phones out there right now that don't, and I think that's perfectly fine. And I don't think we're going to have a gigantic screen on this next BlackBerry that you're going to need that. So put that one off to the side for a minute. Does it need to have like 12 gigabytes of RAM like the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra? No, it doesn't. You don't need that much RAM. There are so many phones that are pulling off still with 6 and 8. I think 8 would be a really respectable number though. So yeah, I think it needs to be competitive in that department for people to take it seriously. Does it need to have 256 or 512 gigabytes of storage? No, I don't think that it does. I think that as long as it has 128 and it has expandable storage, that's probably going to be fine for most people. Does it need to have stereo speakers? That would be nice, but not necessarily something we have to have, but I would ideally like to see that. When it comes to the actual size, what kind of screen do we need to have on there? Well, I'd like to have an OLED panel. That would be really nice. I loved it on some of the older BlackBerry phones, so if they could pull off an OLED panel and make it similar to this form factor, but maybe stretch it out a little bit wider, kind of like the Passport, maybe make the screen a little bit shorter, I think I would be happy with that. I think something that would look like the Classic would be nice. But talking about those couple of things that we've talked about real quick, those don't necessarily have to be the biggest, highest, top tier specs that you can get. What I do think that we need though is I think we need at least a Snapdragon 765. If we're rolling into next year, I guess they'll probably have like a 775, so that would be ideal. I don't think we need an 8 series Snapdragon processor. It's just not necessary, especially for what you're bringing to the table with the BlackBerry, because what we're looking for is an amazing keyboard experience that has a really good phone underneath it. A Snapdragon 765 right now would make me perfectly happy. I'm using it in multiple phones. I've got right here with me the TCL 10.5G UW, got the Snapdragon 765. I reviewed the LG Velvet, Snapdragon 765. And I've got probably the most convincing phone for me this year, the Pixel 5, which has a Snapdragon 765. This right here, I think, is the best illustration of what we can look for in a BlackBerry, because if you took this phone and you put it on a keyboard like this, now I don't think we need one that's this big, but having basically something on the same level as the Pixel 5, maybe at about the $699 price point, I would be tickled to death. I think that it would be an excellent device. Now, using the Pixel as a model, we don't have to have an $899 phone. We don't have to have a $999 phone. We don't have to have a $1,000 phone. And I don't think a lot of people would spend $1,000 on a BlackBerry. I totally would. But I don't think there's enough people out there that would keep the brand going moving forward. People would say, well, we thought they were dead. Why are they charging $1,000 out of nowhere? I think that that's entirely too high priced. And you don't need that to get a really good experience. Looking at the phones this year that have a Snapdragon 765, they're kind of priced. Well, I mean, they were priced a lot higher, but now that the TCL 10.5G UW has it at $399, that kind of changes things a little bit. But, I mean, you look at the Pixel 5, it's $699. You look at the Velvet, it's $599. I think that that is a respectable price point for a really good phone. What do those phones have, though, that the BlackBerry doesn't? They have much better cameras, and this is probably, if you asked me a few years ago, I would say that the camera would have been kind of low on my list of things I thought was super important in a BlackBerry. But the camera landscape has really changed. What I mean by that is 4 or 5 years ago, the best cameras on the market weren't essentially all that amazing. People were like, oh my gosh, this is mind-blowing. Look at what they're doing with cameras nowadays. Well, I think BlackBerry kind of adopted that mindset for entirely too long. And they tried with the dual 12 megapixels and the Key2 to get on par, but they're still lacking. So I went out to dinner with my wife a few days ago, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to snap a picture with this Key2 while we're sitting here, throw it up with the Pixel 5 picture, and see what people think. And see which one, if they can guess which one it is. I was going to play this game. And it didn't look that good. I took it and I'm like, I can't post this because I wouldn't, one, people would be able to tell immediately, and two, this is just not up to my standards of quality. So if you're out in ideal lighting conditions, can it still take okay pictures? Yes, but it needs a really versatile camera. Why? Because people really care about this. And I've got another video that I'm planning on making talking about BlackBerry. I don't necessarily think that Apple killed BlackBerry. I think people would agree with me on this. BlackBerry killed BlackBerry. They thought, of course, that people only wanted to use their platform. They thought people only wanted to use a keyboard. They missed the boat on the idea that people wanted to communicate in more ways than text messaging and BBM. And of course, had BlackBerry adopted the Android operating system earlier, maybe we'd be in a different position right now. I think that there was just this one way of thinking they had that was, we have to have our own operating system. Once they realized that they couldn't get the app support that they needed, then I think they probably should have recognized that the operating system wasn't going to be something that was massively adopted anywhere, because people want Pinterest, people want Instagram, people want Facebook, people want WhatsApp, people want Viber, there's all these things. And it's frustrating to me now because going back, I would love to use a BlackBerry 10 phone still, but I need Slack for work. I need Google Chat or Google Hangouts so I can talk to people at work. So there are different ways to communicate. I went back and I used my older BlackBerry and I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'll text people. And then I realized that nobody texts me, ever. The only person that texts me is like my wife and my mom. So 95% of the ways that I communicate nowadays just are not really possible on a BlackBerry 10 device. That right there is pretty much kind of what did it. I mean, so while the world was exploding and exploring this whole new world of social media, BlackBerry was just kind of left behind on the boat dock while everybody else went off and had a good time. So that's fine though. BlackBerry was always security first, communication first, but the problem is how secure does your phone need to be if nobody's using it? So hopefully moving forward, I talked with Peter Franklin in my interview, talking about OnwardMobility because they're bringing the next BlackBerry to market, and we discussed the idea of the camera. Having a flagship quality camera is one of the important things that they're looking forward to putting into this new device. And I think that that hits the nail on the head. The thing is, you kind of have to have that nowadays. Like with BlackBerry 10, with the Z10, with the Q10, with the Classic, with the Passport, they all had like these 2 megapixel front-facing selfie cameras and like the same 8 megapixel rear camera, other than the Passport with 13 megapixels. So the photos just weren't that good, and then you couldn't share them anywhere. So moving forward, yes, we want a secure operating system, but this phone has to be one that you can use for work and also use for normal everyday life. And let's face it, people use their phones for that. They take pictures, they share them on Twitter, they take pictures, they share them on Instagram, they take pictures for everything. So looking at a phone now, it's kind of eliminated the camera roll out in the traditional world, the way we look at it, because all you have to do is snap the picture and directly upload it. So moving forward, the new BlackBerry, does it have to have flagship specs? No, but it needs to have a flagship similar camera. It needs to have a really good screen, and it needs to have a really fantastic keyboard. Those things combined with great battery life and security, I think that this will be a successful phone. But they cannot skimp on things. They cannot make a cheap piece of garbage. And I don't think that they're going to do that. I think they're going to make a good quality phone. And I think that's one of the reasons why they partnered with FIH for this. Of course, Foxconn. They made the BlackBerry Classic before. They know how to make a good keyboard phone. They know how to make a quality phone. It doesn't have to necessarily be the prettiest thing in the world. It doesn't have to be the shiniest thing in the world, but it needs to be solid. We need to not have any issues with quality control. We need to not have screens falling out. We need to not have fingerprint sensors and space bars failing. We need to not have buttons sticking. We need this phone to be made right. And I think that this partnership they've entered into with FIH is going to get us there. But does it need to have flagship specs? No. It just needs to have really good specs and a really good camera and a really good keyboard and really good battery life. I think these are realistic goals for the sub $700 market. Hopefully they can get it around the $600 market. And I know that it's going to have a physical keyboard. I know it's going to be running Android. I know it's going to have 5G. That gives us some inclination into what we're going to get. We should see at least some form of 7 series Snapdragon processor. I don't necessarily think it's going to be an 8. Call me crazy, but I think it's going to be a 7 series. I'm totally okay with that. I've been using lots of phones. Like, look, I've got the iPhone 12. I use this. I've got the Note 20 Ultra. I use this. I've got the Fold. And then I've got the Blackberry Key2, which is still a fairly capable phone. It still does everything you need it to. I think it's going to be fine for a couple more years. But looking forward, we need to have some improvements. We need to have a modern operating system. The swipe gestures would be great. I would really like that. That's the biggest thing that frustrates me about the Key2 is I'm using these other swipe gesture based operating systems all the time, which is funny because we moved so far away from BlackBerry 10, which was all gesture based, and people are like, no, that's terrible. Nobody wants that. Now that's what we have, and BlackBerry doesn't have it. So, like I said in the beginning, do we need flagship specs? No, we don't. Do we need expensive flagship prices? No, we don't. We just need a good, reliable phone that's built well, excellent quality control, has a top-tier camera, all day long battery life, ideally 2 days, but for a power user, it needs to get through at least 6-7 hours of screen on time. Fantastic keyboard, and I think that we're going to have a winner, and I think that we'll be okay. And that's the thing, the BlackBerry is not going to be the #1 smartphone in all the world anymore. It's just not. And had BlackBerry given up on that idea a long time ago, we'd probably still be thriving and existing right now instead of moving from licensing agreement to licensing agreement, trying to find somebody to make the name successful again. So, I think it'll be all right. Going this partnership route, working with different companies to bring it all together, limiting overhead, limiting costs, limiting liability. If we get a new one every year or every 2 years, I'm perfectly okay with that. I just want one that has a physical keyboard, that works, that lets me take good pictures, that's secure, and I can enjoy using on a day-to-day basis, whether it's for work or for personal use. And I hope that's what we're going to get. I think that's what we're going to get, and I think it's going to be a good phone. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions or comments, please sound off. I know you guys want to talk about this stuff. Of course, I want to talk about it too. If you have your own thoughts and impressions, feel free. Please bring them and we'll talk about it. If you enjoy the video, please hit the like and the subscribe button and the little notification bell if you want updates when new videos come out. And as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys next time.